Okay, for those of you who know me over the years, I think you'll agree that I've been pretty bullish on the lab scopes. In other words, he's the guy that's going to give us all that good information, signal integrity of the circuit, whether it's primary, secondary, DRF, whatever the case may be. So when we're talking about the lab scope, what we want to specifically talk about here is that is the guy that's going to tell you if that signal is good. In other words, do I have dynamic signal integrity? Is the signal coming to the ground? Is my amplitude there? Is my sequence there? Do I wiggle a connector and lose the signal? Things like that. So we're going to use the lab scope on secondary ignition, state of health, firing KVs, of course, spark duration periods. We can use the multimeter graphing mode, the record mode, but what we're also going to do is bring the lab scope in. We might have that intake valve intermittently hanging up, causing a loss of compression and an intermittent misfire. We'll be interfacing the pressure transducers with the DSOs and dynamically watch the compression stroke with this engine running, as you will see. In addition, we're going to be looking at cam timing for variation with the pressure transducer. Here again, interface with the lab scope. And of course, what we talked about earlier, the fuel pump current ramping testing. Okay, in addition, we're going to be looking at secondary ignition on a lot of these DIS and COPs using a COP wand, as you will see, and we're going to demonstrate that during the presentation. I think you technicians would agree with me that we could actually have a mechanical integrity issue of the engine, as in compression, low compression, maybe a cam timing retard problem. So let's talk briefly about mechanical integrity state of health. In other words, let's look at wide open throttle cranking compression. Let's look at the idle compression with the engine running. Let's look at the cruise compression. Now, you would also agree with me, hopefully, that you could have an intermittent misfire from, let's say, too much slop in a timing chain, timing belt, whatever the case may be, causing too much variance between the crank and cam gears, causing intermittent misfire or intermittent sync problem with the coil packs. By looking at the exhaust valve opening points and intake valve opening points to make sure that we don't have a retarded valve timing problem, again, from too much slop in a timing chain or a timing belt. Okay, let's talk about the secondary ignition system. In other words, the state of health of the secondary ignition circuit. Now, what we're doing here, actually, we're going to refer to this as what I call, in most cases, the 10-minute scope check. I'm boasting here that you can scope most vehicles on the road today in and out with a secondary COP wand, in and out easily within 10 minutes. So when we do that, we're looking at how much kV demand is required to fire those spark plugs. If we have a very high firing kV demand, that means the spark duration period is going to shorten up proportionally. So we're going to be looking at three critical points here. Firing kV, the spark kV point, making sure it's where it should be, as you will see, and of course the all-important spark duration period during idle no-load conditions. And then last but not least, maybe if the misfire only occurs intermittently under a power brake loaded type condition, we're going to power brake that vehicle, and we're going to watch those spark line characteristics to maybe find that intermittent lean density misfire, as you will see.